What if you woke up tomorrow and every headline said the same thing? Markets are crashing. Companies are laying off thousands of workers. Inflation
Oh
is
no,
rising
it's crashing!
again. Another recession has officially begun. For most people, that moment wouldn't simply be about money. It would feel personal. Almost overnight, confidence would disappear. Plans would be postponed. Dreams would suddenly feel expensive. Even ordinary purchases would begin carrying an uncomfortable question. Can I still afford this? What's fascinating is that recessions don't only expose economies, they expose people. The strange part is that two people can earn the exact same income, live in the same neighborhood, and even work at the same company. Yet when the economy begins to shake, one person panics while the other remains surprisingly calm. Not because they know something the news doesn't, not because they're luckier, but because they spent years quietly building habits that were designed for difficult seasons long before those seasons ever arrived. I used to think financial security came from earning more money. If I could just get a better salary, start another business, land a bigger client, everything would finally feel safe. But over time, I realized something that completely changed the way I thought about money. Income creates opportunity. Habits determine whether that opportunity survives. That's why some lottery winners lose everything within a few years, and why some ordinary families continue building wealth through recessions, inflation, market crashes, and uncertainty. The difference isn't usually intelligence, it's behavior. Modern life teaches us to prepare for success. Very few people prepare for instability. We're encouraged to think about promotions, vacations, new houses, expensive cars, and lifestyle upgrades. Almost nobody asks a different question. What kind of person do I need to become before life becomes difficult? Because eventually, life always becomes difficult. Maybe it's a recession. Maybe it's losing a job. Maybe it's an unexpected medical bill. Maybe it's helping family members through hard times. The exact crisis doesn't matter. What matters is who you become before it arrives. The people who remain calm during financial storms usually aren't fearless. They're prepared. Preparation creates a kind of confidence that no salary can buy. And here's what surprised me most. The habits that create that confidence are unbelievably boring. Nobody posts them on Instagram. Nobody brags about them at parties. Nobody becomes famous because they quietly followed them for 20 years. But when everyone else begins reacting emotionally, these habits become invisible armor. If another recession started tomorrow, I wouldn't suddenly invent a new financial strategy. I wouldn't panic and completely change the way I live. I'd simply continue doing the same 8 boring habits that have quietly shaped every financial decision I've made. Because wealth isn't built during a recession. A recession simply reveals whether the habits were already there. And the truth is, the strongest financial decisions are almost always made long before anyone realizes they'll need them. The first habit isn't exciting. In fact, it's so ordinary that most people completely overlook it. If another recession began tomorrow, the very first thing I'd protect wouldn't be my investments. It wouldn't be my credit score. It wouldn't even be my income. I'd protect my cash. That might sound strange in a world obsessed with making money grow as quickly as possible. Every day we're told that every dollar should be working. Every spare cent should be invested. Every opportunity should be maximized. But recessions have a way of changing the rules. When uncertainty arrives, growth suddenly becomes less important than survival. Cash doesn't just sit quietly in a bank account. It buys something far more valuable than interest. It buys time. Time to think before making desperate decisions. Time to search for the right opportunity instead of accepting the first one out of fear. Time to say no to a toxic workplace because your next paycheck isn't your only lifeline. What most people never realize is that an emergency fund isn't just financial security, it's emotional security. The person with savings doesn't necessarily have fewer problems. They simply have more options. And options have a strange effect on the human mind. They reduce panic. They slow down impulsive decisions. They allow logic to return when emotions begin taking over. Without noticing it, many people spend years chasing higher incomes while completely ignoring the one thing that would actually help them sleep better at night. Not another raise, not another investment, just breathing room. Because when every unexpected expense feels like an emergency, your brain never truly relaxes. You aren't planning, you're surviving. And people in survival mode rarely make their best financial decisions. That leads me to the second habit I never abandon. I never spend tomorrow's income today. Modern life quietly encourages us to borrow from our future. Buy now, pay later. 0% today. Only a small monthly payment. At first, it feels harmless, almost invisible. Until one day you realize your future paycheck already belongs to decisions you made months ago. Before you've earned a single dollar, it's already been promised to credit cards, subscriptions, car payments, and purchases you barely remember making. That's one of the cruelest psychological traps of debt. It steals tomorrow's freedom. Every future paycheck arrives with fewer choices than the one before it. The strange part is that debt rarely begins with recklessness. It usually begins with optimism. We'll earn more next year. I'll pay it off quickly. It's only this one time. Most people don't wake up hoping to become financially trapped. They simply underestimate how quickly small obligations become permanent ones. I've learned that financial peace isn't created by having access to more credit. It's created by needing less of it. Because every dollar you haven't already promised to someone else gives you something incredibly valuable during uncertain times. Freedom. Freedom to wait. Freedom to think. Freedom to make decisions based on wisdom instead of urgency. And when a recession finally arrives, that freedom often becomes the difference between panic and quiet confidence. The third habit I'd never stop is probably the least impressive one. I deliberately keep my lifestyle below what I can actually afford. That sounds almost backwards in a world where success is measured by upgrades. A bigger house, a newer car, a more expensive watch, a vacation everyone else can see. We're constantly told that if we've worked hard enough, we deserve to reward ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying your money. The danger begins when your lifestyle grows at the exact same speed as your income. Because then every raise quietly disappears before it ever has the chance to improve your future. I've noticed something fascinating. The happiest financially secure people I've met weren't always the highest earners. They were simply difficult to impress. They didn't feel pressured to upgrade every time their salary increased. They understood something most of us learn far too late. Every upgrade comes with an invisible bill, a larger mortgage, higher insurance, more maintenance, more expectations, more pressure to keep earning at the same pace. Slowly, the things you believed would make life easier begin demanding more of your life. That's why I try to make my life intentionally boring. Not because I don't enjoy nice things, but because I enjoy freedom even more. The fourth habit is perhaps the hardest of all. When everyone else panics, I refuse to make emotional financial decisions. Every recession follows a familiar pattern. The headlines become louder. The predictions become darker. Social media fills with fear. People begin selling investments they promised they'd hold for years, not because anything fundamentally changed overnight, but because fear changed them. I've learned that fear has an incredible ability to disguise itself as wisdom. It whispers, "Do something. Get out before it's too late. Everyone else is selling." But history has shown us something remarkable. Economic storms eventually pass. Markets recover. Businesses adapt. New opportunities appear. The people who build lasting wealth aren't the ones who perfectly predict every recession. They're the ones who remain emotionally steady while everyone else reacts emotionally. That doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to let panic become your financial advisor. The fifth habit has nothing to do with money itself. I never stop investing in my ability to earn. Recessions don't just test bank accounts. They test adaptability. Industries change. Technology changes. Jobs disappear. New opportunities replace old ones. The people who recover fastest aren't always the ones with the biggest investment portfolios. They're the ones whose skills remain valuable no matter what the economy is doing. That's why I see learning as one of the safest investments I can make. Reading, practicing, building new skills, improving communication, understanding technology, growing professionally. No recession can permanently take away knowledge you've already earned. And unlike a stock portfolio, your skills continue producing value long after the headlines disappear. What most people never realize is that wealth isn't only stored in bank accounts. Sometimes it's stored inside the person you've quietly become. the habits you practice, the discipline you build, the skills nobody sees. Because when difficult times eventually arrive, those invisible investments often become the strongest form of financial security you'll ever own. The sixth habit I never stop is simple. I avoid unnecessary debt as if my future depends on it. Because in many ways, it does. Debt isn't always evil. A mortgage that helps you buy a home, a business loan that creates more income, an education that genuinely increases your opportunities. Those can all be useful tools. But somewhere along the way, debt quietly changed its purpose. It stopped helping people build wealth and started helping people perform wealth. Today, it's easier than ever to buy a lifestyle you haven't actually earned. A newer phone, a luxury car, designer clothes, furniture, vacations, even groceries, all available with just a few taps. Modern finance has made spending feel almost painless. You don't hand over cash anymore. You don't even see the money leaving. You simply tap a screen, and your future quietly agrees to pay for your present. That's what makes unnecessary debt so dangerous. It doesn't just cost interest, it steals options. Every monthly payment becomes another promise you've made to the future, a future that may look very different from today. If another recession arrived tomorrow, the people carrying the heaviest debt wouldn't just be worried about losing income. They'd be worried about keeping promises their income was supposed to fulfill. That's an exhausting way to live. I've learned that one of the greatest forms of wealth isn't owning more things, it's owning fewer people. There's a kind of peace that comes from knowing your paycheck belongs mostly to you. That peace is difficult to measure, but impossible to replace. The seventh habit is one that completely changed the way I think about success. I buy freedom, not status. For years, I thought expensive things represented success. A luxury car meant someone had made it. A large house meant financial security. Designer brands meant confidence. But over time, I realized something strange. Many people were buying symbols of freedom, while quietly giving up their actual freedom to keep them. Working longer hours, taking jobs they disliked, accepting constant stress, all to protect an image that strangers would forget within minutes. That realization changed everything for me. Now, whenever I'm tempted to spend money, I ask myself a different question. Will this purchase give me more freedom or less? Will it reduce future pressure or create another monthly obligation? Will it help me sleep better or make me worry about keeping up appearances? Sometimes the most valuable purchase isn't something you buy. It's something you decide not to buy. Because every unnecessary expense carries an invisible price, not just in money, but in time, attention, flexibility, and peace of mind. The people who seem the calmest during difficult economic seasons usually aren't chasing status anymore. They're protecting freedom. Freedom to leave a bad job. Freedom to support family when it matters. Freedom to take opportunities without asking whether they can afford to breathe first. I've come to believe that's what real wealth quietly looks like. Not having the most impressive life, but having the most choices. Because when your decisions are driven by freedom instead of appearance, even a recession begins to lose some of its power over you. The eighth habit I never stop is probably the simplest to understand and the hardest to live by. I think in decades, not headlines. That sounds almost impossible today because we're surrounded by urgency. Every notification demands immediate attention. Every news headline insists that everything is changing. Every market movement feels like the beginning of a financial disaster. And if you watch long enough, you begin believing that every week requires a completely different financial strategy. But the strange part is, the people who quietly build lasting wealth rarely react to every headline. They understand something that took me years to appreciate. The economy moves in cycles. Fear moves in cycles. Optimism moves in cycles. Markets rise. Markets fall. Governments change. Technology changes. Recessions come. Recoveries follow. The headlines always change, but the principles rarely do. That's why I no longer ask myself, what's going to happen this month? I ask a different question. Where do I want to be 10 years from now? Because that single question changes almost every financial decision. It becomes easier to save, easier to invest, easier to ignore comparison, easier to walk away from purchases that only satisfy today's emotions. When you think in decades, you stop trying to win today's approval. You start building tomorrow's freedom. Looking back, I realized none of these 8 habits are exciting. Nobody applauds them. Nobody posts them on social media. Nobody becomes famous because they quietly saved instead of spent, because they kept cash instead of chasing appearances, because they said no to unnecessary debt, because they invested in themselves while everyone else chased shortcuts, because they stayed calm when fear became fashionable. These habits are ordinary, almost boring, but maybe that's exactly the point. Real financial security is rarely built through dramatic moments. It's built through ordinary decisions, repeated for an extraordinarily long time. If another recession began tomorrow, I wouldn't feel excited. I wouldn't pretend I could predict what would happen next. No one can. But I also wouldn't feel helpless, because confidence doesn't come from knowing the future. It comes from trusting the habits you've already built. I've learned that recessions don't create our financial character. They reveal it. They expose the habits we practiced when nobody was watching, the choices we made before they became necessary, the discipline we developed before life tested it. Maybe that's the lesson I wish I had understood years ago. Financial freedom isn't about becoming fearless. It's about becoming prepared. Prepared enough that uncertainty no longer controls your decisions. Prepared enough that temporary fear doesn't permanently change your future. Prepared enough to understand that wealth isn't measured by how impressive your life looks when the economy is booming. It's measured by how peacefully you can continue living when everyone else begins to panic. So if another recession really did arrive tomorrow, I wouldn't search for a brand new strategy. I'd simply return to the same 8 boring habits that have quietly protected me all along. Because in the end, the people who build lasting wealth aren't usually the ones chasing the next financial secret. They're the ones who quietly master the ordinary things long before extraordinary times arrive.